Okay. All right, great. Well, welcome everybody. People are coming in. Just multitasking here. All right. To this non-duality Zoom with Richard Sylvester. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And thank you everybody for coming. So basically how this works, Richard's going to give us an introduction. I got sirens behind me, sorry. And after that, if you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand virtually and you can jump in and ask your question. Other than that, you can type your question in live on YouTube and I'll read it on your behalf. And with that, I will turn it over to Richard Sylvester, please.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. So I'll talk for a little while and then we'll see what happens. So, non-duality. I often start at the same place when I'm giving an introduction to this. Non-duality, the heart of non-duality is that there is no self. I mean, why start there? No particular reason except that it is kind of central. You know, the heart of what we're talking about is that there is no self. In a way, we could almost stop the meeting now by simply noticing that everything else that is said, really, that's directly related to this, stems from that. I want to say staggering statement. Because it kind of, if it's the first time, it's very unlikely this is the first time that anybody involved in this Zoom meeting has heard that said. But if it is the first time, if we can remember back to the first time this was suggested to us, it really is a kind of quite staggering this is quite a staggering notion, idea, thought, or actually reality to take in, to wrestle with, or to argue against. In my case, and in many other people's cases, one of the first reactions to hearing there is no self is to kind of wrestle against it. It seems so outlandish. And it seems even more outlandish as the implications of that sink in or come home, because the implication is that nothing which I thought belonged to me actually does belong to me. And even that sentence is in a way a kind of absurdity, because there is no I that it could belong to, and there is no I who could think that, but nevertheless that thought may come. You know, when the implications of this sink in, that nothing that I think belongs to me actually belongs to me because there is no I. So, for example, my past, which may be very precious to me, parts of my past probably will be very precious to me. My future, again, my expectations and hopes of the future, or perhaps my dreads and fears and anxieties about the future, none of that belongs to me. I might feel quite pleased to be rid of dread and anxiety and fear about the future, but I may not be quite so pleased to be rid of hopes and desires and expectations of positive things from the future.
2 to 3:30 Eastern time. The link will be
happening there.
This video.
Okay. So it really is an astonishing proposition that there is no self, but really what this meeting is about, really any real non-duality meeting, what it's about is that it's not a proposition that's being presented here. The proposition doesn't matter. What we think about this doesn't matter. What the mind says doesn't matter. What we're talking about here is the possibility of the direct seeing of what's being spoken about here. And when there's the direct seeing that there is no self, then it's simply incontrovertible, as I often say. It's simply something which cannot be denied. And then a great deal, or perhaps everything, that seemed to belong to me throughout my life is simply, I want to say falls away, perhaps it's better to say is simply seen through. That's a phrase I use a lot. It's a phrase other speakers use a lot. What does it mean? You know, to say, well, things are seen through. The past is seen through. The person is seen through. The future is seen through. It means that it doesn't stop existing. I mean, if we take the past, for example, memory, in inverted commas, goes on existing, but it's seen through. In other words, it's seen to be, I use this word again, I use it often, it's seen to be an illusion. And I always gloss that word the first time I use it in a meeting. You know, it doesn't mean, as some of us sometimes think it means, it doesn't mean something that's simply unreal, imaginary. It means something that is not what it appears to be. So we could say that, you know, my memory of a past event as I sit here is real. Yeah, it's a real illusion. It's not real in the way that the person thinks that it is. So we could say that really of, you know, everything that is seen once the person's seen through, it's seen to be an illusion. In other words, not what it appears to be. And so what's reality rather than illusion? Well, reality is there is no self, and what is happening is the totality of everything. Or perhaps again, I could say what appears to be happening is the totality of everything. This is the totality of existence. Whatever phenomena are arising, the sound of this voice, whatever's appearing visually, maybe the temperature of the room that you're sitting in, wherever the attention goes, that's what's happening, that's what's real. This is, if you like, you know, just an ever-changing flow of impressions. But the important thing is that there is no one for whom those impressions are arising. We could say that the sense that there is someone at the center of all those impressions is just itself another impression, but it just happens to be a rather addictive impression. So there's no self. And we could add to that some really mysterious things. There's no time, there's no space, there is simply what's arising. This isn't going anywhere. It doesn't have the kind of purpose that the mind tends to invent for it. We can throw out all the religious stories, we can throw out the spiritual stories. This is simply what it is. This is nothing manifesting itself as everything. And I'm coming to the end of this introductory talk pretty soon, but it's about this stage. I usually remember to add the most important, I would say the most important thing about this, because this seeing does tend to bring, and as I've said before, an end to seeking. And we could ask ourselves why that is. And I would say that the reason why there tends to be no more seeking after this is seen, apart from the fact that it's seen that there is no seeker, is that it is seen that ultimately the nature of this, what we're talking about, you know, whatever the hell this is, and the mind cannot possibly make sense of that, no matter how much it tries, but that ultimately the nature of this, everything, whatever's arising, is that it is utterly empty and utterly full. It is completely empty. There is, if you like, nothing happening. This is nothing happening, but it is also completely full. And, you know, the most obvious question for any mind to then ask when it hears that is to say, well, full of what? What are you talking about? What do you mean? And there's no phrase that can describe it well, but the phrase I use, the phrase other people use, there may be better phrases, but if there are, I haven't come across one, is that what this is ultimately is it's full of unconditional love. This is an outpouring of unconditional love. Now, I'm well aware that the mind may leap in immediately with objections to that and say, well, if this is an outpouring of unconditional love, it certainly doesn't look like it sometimes. Well, if we want to have that question, that statement, a discussion, an argument, whatever around that, we can have it, you know, during the meeting or not. It doesn't matter. But really, all that can be said when this is seen is that ultimately, whatever the appearance may be manifesting, which doesn't look like that, ultimately this is an outpouring of unconditional love. And it seems that it's that really puts an end to seeking. Because when unconditional love has been seen, it's like, well, what else? What could there possibly be to seek for? So it's like we could say there's two things. It's like somehow the seeker becomes destroyed in this seeing. And maybe part of the reason for that is because when it's seen that this is unconditional love manifesting, well, you know, there's no possibility that there's anything else that can still be sought for. Although it's always possible that the mind may make up another story for a while and chase it and then drop it again, because anything's possible. So I think I've spoken quite long enough now for an introductory talk, so I'll close with that and we'll just see what happens now.
Thank you, Richard. All right, well, we have our first question. Go right ahead. Sorry, I can't see.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Once everything is seen, it's clear that there can't be anything separate from it. That's, I think, what has helped me. But my question would be, in a manifestation, is there anything to which it would be inappropriate to add the word apparently, which is one of Tony Parsons' great words?
No.
Is there anything which
No.
wouldn't be appropriate?
Well,
everything apparently is.
Everything that can be said, everything that can be stated, you know, yeah, this is an appearance, you know, this is apparently happening. It's I mean, it's not a good word, that, but it's the best word there is. It's pointing to the fact that, you know, the seeing of nothing and everything is the revelation that this is an appearance. It's taken for reality until it's seen through, and then it's seen that, you know, I can only use images to explain this. You know, it's seen that somehow this which seems so solid is actually evanescent. It's actually like a shimmering film. It has I want to say it has no substance. It does have substance. It has the substance of an appearance. Images people use, metaphors people use, it's, if you like, it's like a cinema screen. You know, you sit in the audience, you watch a film on a cinema screen, it seems to be, you know, pretty much utterly real. And yet, you know, if you go right up to the cinema screen and look closely at it, all of those people, all of those places, the cars, the guns, the explosions, if it's that kind of film, can be seen as just a sort of shimmering light, just a play of light. You know, that's as good a metaphor as any. As I've said before, you know, no metaphor is particularly good, but that's as good as any. Yeah. So, you know, when it's said that this is an appearance, it's meant literally, not metaphorically.
Because saying nothing has happened, and then talking about energy and movement don't seem to go easily together, because you're thinking, well, the energy is not static, is it? There seems to be movement within nothing happening, which is
yeah
an odd put together.
This is absolute hell for the mind, But, you know, if this was kind of philosophy and so forth, oh, let's give up now and go and have a cup of tea and have our supper. But, you know, this isn't philosophy. It's an attempt to, a hopeless attempt to describe what may actually be seen. So the suggestion from here, let's say that there is a person standing in Piccadilly Circus. I tend to choose Piccadilly Circus because it's one of the busiest, noisiest places in London. So there is, let's say there's a person, a person standing in Piccadilly Circus on a busy Saturday afternoon. And then let's say for no reason that we can possibly discern, the person drops. And suddenly there is no one standing in Piccadilly Circus. And yet Piccadilly Circus is still being experienced, but it's being experienced by no one. And at that point, it's recognized the noise and the movement is still going on, but it's going on for no one. And at that point, it's recognized that that noise of the roar of traffic that's still going on is the noise of silence. It is absolutely silent. And it's recognized that the whir of movement of the taxis and pedestrians and buses and cycles, that whirl of movement is stillness. Now, there's no way the mind can, well, I'm saying there's no way the mind can make sense of that. Actually, I'm sure there is. I'm sure the mind could write a philosophical book 1,000 pages long to justify that, but it would just be philosophical nonsense. But, you know, just a moment of seeing that, and it's simply seen as incontrovertible. Stillness and movement are the same thing. Movement is stillness moving, and sound and silence are the same thing. Sound is stillness making a noise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please. We have 35 people here in the Zoom. So,
I have a question.
okay, go for it.
And this estate that you described in the middle of London, so you had this experience, but this experience stayed with you, or it just happened once?
Firstly, again, language is really difficult. So firstly, I'm reluctant to call it an experience, because for me, an experience is something that happens for a person. So this is what's seen, if you like, when there isn't a person there. So there is no experience because there's no experiencer. All right. However, having sort of said that, there are nothing that I say here implies in any sense that there are any rules about this, that this is how it has to happen. I mean, how could there be any rules about this? We're talking about absolute, total, complete, unlimited freedom here. Right, but I describe this in my first book, and I talk about it sometimes when questions like the last question we had come up, because this happens, you know, often enough in this appearance for different characters to make it kind of, you know, just, I want to say worth commenting on. It's not really that it's worth commenting on. It's just something that some of us, you know, find it a little bit helpful to communicate about, because it does happen quite often. There's no necessity for this to happen, you know, for awakening to happen in this way. But quite often there is a kind of an initial first awakening where there is, and it can be, I mean, it's timeless, of course it's timeless, but in the history of a person, we could be talking about half a second or a second. I mean, it can be just like, you know, a clap of lightning, as it's described sometimes in the tradition, where there is simply emptiness is seen. So the person's not there, so the person's empty, and they're simply seen that everything is also empty. And that can be quite a shock, obviously. It can cause, in the story of time, it can apparently seem to cause, how can we put it, you know, a kind of huge realignment of the character that thought that they were a person up to that moment. It can also quite often usher in a period of despair, because there's something quite magical about that seeing, and yet it's here, it's gone in a flash, and it becomes obvious that there is no way for the person to get back to that because the person doesn't exist. And so often what happens after that is that there's, as I say, a period of despair. I've talked about that before, and I won't talk any more about it now. If there's another question about it later, we can. But I often say that despair is paradoxically not nearly as bad as it sounds, as the word sounds. I often say it's actually hope that's the problem, not despair that's the problem. And then what can happen is that in the apparent history of the person or the character, there can then be another event in which again there's kind of complete disappearance of the person, but this time, as well as emptiness, the fullness, which I've already talked about this evening, is also seen. And that fullness, I use that phrase, the fullness of unconditional love, because it's a better phrase than any other that I've come across. And it's seeing that this is ultimately an outpouring of unconditional love. It's that seems to bring an end, a permanent end to the one who was seeking. So after that, the despair is usually gone. The seeking, there's no absolute rules, but the seeking is usually gone. And then what's left after that? Well, what's left after that is just life being lived. It's just seen that there is no one who has that life. So it's like up to that point, there seems to be a person or a character who is living their life. And after that, there's simply life being lived. And that life that's being lived might be better, it might be worse, it might be the same, it might change, it might not change. There are absolutely no rules.
But what is the condition to have okay, it's not an experience, but to be totally selfless? Apparently, just knowing that, it doesn't help, because when you just read or hear about this, it's just something that randomly can happen to some people. So what one can do to feel it, or I don't know, to reach to this state of having no self.
Yes, knowing about this is no help at all. I mean, this isn't about help. These talks aren't about help. The meetings aren't about help. Indeed, there is something. I mean, I am the man that came up with what I called in my first book the great mantra: helpless, hopeless, and meaningless. There is a seeing here. It's very, again, language is paradoxical. There is a seeing here that we are helpless. That's not quite right, of course, because there is no one who is helpless. It's just that there is a seeing of helplessness. There may be a seeing of helplessness. There may be a seeing of hopelessness. It's not that it is hopeless for us, but it's like, there's no help. Hope dies. There may be hopelessness, and there may be the recognition that this story of a person and all the beliefs and all the philosophizing, and particularly if, like me, you'd been a spiritual seeker, the lofty ideals and the philosophizing, there's a recognition that the story is all completely meaningless. And that can be heard with despair, or it can be heard with relief, or it may be heard with both. But in any case, whatever happens around that, it has nothing to do with you and who you think you are. So indeed, we could say, yeah, there's nothing that you can do about that, but there's nothing you can do about anything because there is no you. So you may want a cup of tea. There is nothing you can do about that. Nevertheless, making and drinking a cup of tea may happen, but it won't be a person who's making that cup of tea and who's drinking it. If this is seen, it won't be a person who's seeing it.
Natalie has her hand raised. Go ahead, Natalie. Natalie, you're muted.
Oh God,
there
hi.
you
Yes,
go.
I know. Hold on, there's a lot going on right now. Sorry. Can you go to someone else
All
real
right, we'll
quick?
come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure,
Sorry.
sure.
I got a
Uh,
little zealous there.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody, Mary, did you have more to add to that, or anyone else?
Hi, Richard.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. I understand everything, not in the sense of understanding logically, but deeply inside. I don't have any questions about what you are talking about. Nonetheless, I feel that there is an ongoing sense of habitual seeking inside. It's a kind of a conditioning. It's a habit. It's an addiction. Something is not satisfied, and it's still trying to find something in the future or somewhere else. And I know it makes no sense at all. Nonetheless, it is there. I don't know if you have anything to say about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious thing that comes to me to say is that this is the, let's call it, this is the normal condition, you know, for whatever this is, a person. You know, a person is a seeker, a character is a seeker. Now, not all of us necessarily, in fact, you know, probably the majority of us do not seek in terms of what this meeting is about. You know, the majority of people are probably seeking for something which is not whatever we might want to call it, you know, spiritual advancement, enlightenment, awakening, whatever it might be. You know, most of us, you know, spend our lives seeking for other things like, you know, a partner, a car, a job, fulfillment, joy in the country, whatever it might be. But for some of us, of course, you know, for a proportion of us, not a small proportion of us, we become gripped with whatever we might want to call it. I use the phrase spiritual seeking as a kind of shorthand. I mean, I was a very passionate spiritual seeker for many years. And then in the story of a person, that seeking might become more about what we're talking about. Doesn't have to happen like that. There may be no spiritual seeking at all, but then simply a fascination with what we're talking about here may arise. And it's all a complete mystery. It's a complete mystery. You know, why should that be? Well, there's no possibility of answering that question satisfactorily. There's lots of possibilities of answering that question, but no possibility of ever knowing that any of those answers have any validity whatsoever. So basically we come back to this phrase, you know, so what happens is what happens. So in the story of Richard, there was no interest in anything to do with this or with spirituality. And then suddenly at a certain age, there was an absolute addiction to spiritual seeking. And that went on and on and on in the story of Richard. And then suddenly at another point in the story of time, there became an addiction with this instead, because this, for this character, is not about spiritual seeking. It's like everything else, it's a complete mystery. It's a complete mystery. We can rationalize it. We can come up with theories about it. If we follow the great spiritual traditions, we can always find a story which will make sense of that. And all I can say to that is, yeah, and that will just be a story. I mean, in a sense, we could have a kind of sort of health warning over anything to do with non-duality. You know, if it makes sense, it's probably missing the point. So I could come up with, I mean, you know, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with spiritual seeking. I mean, I could come up with a very obvious story about why, for example, at roughly the age of 30, this character became gripped with spiritual seeking or whatever. A very obvious story, and it would just be a story. So it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
Right.
Why do some characters become entranced by this, whereas other characters go through their whole lives and never even come across it, and other characters come across it and they're not remotely interested? And another character comes across it at the age of 40 and isn't interested in it, and then at 60 they become an addict. It's all a mystery.
Yeah, nice way to put it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Gio. Next question, please. Go right ahead. Just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry to come in again, but isn't nothing messaging as we listen?
Well, if you like to have that story, have it. Yeah, sure. I mean, that kind of personalizing it, you could say that. You could, but you see, you could say, isn't nothing making the cup of tea? Yes, of course it is. But I feel like when you say that, isn't nothing messaging, it's not really quite in the way that, well, also nothing is making a cup of tea. I feel like there's an implication there that, like, you know, there's the word that jumped into my head is like, yeah, you know, nothing is being a missionary. You know, nothing is a missionary bringing its missionary work to us. I mean, if you like, yeah, if you like that, have it, you know. But it's a story. Notice that it's something that the mind is saying to try to kind of make sense of what this is happening. To try to make sense of
I'm very pleased you're here. I mean, you're not here. I'm very pleased you're not here, if that's the right way to put it. But, you know, there is a mess, you know, there is something is helping, because it does help. It does help. It's moved me along. It hasn't moved me far enough. It's moved me along, you know. Yeah,
in spite of everything, this may be helpful. Yeah. Yeah, so communication is happening, and for some mysterious reason, which is unfathomable, this communication is heard by some apparent people and not heard by most apparent people. Yeah, and it's a mystery. Yeah.
All right, we have one question here in the chat. Let's see what it is. Is it different for men and women?
I presume the word "it's" in there is signifying something to do with the seeing of this, or awakening, or whatever we want to call it. The only answer, that's a novel question. The only answer I can give to that is it is both the same and different for each apparent individual. It can never be, it is always the same, and yet in terms of the apparent individual or character where this is seen, it is always bizarrely individual, even though there are no individuals. Now, in terms of in terms of going beyond that and saying, is there some sort of general difference that could be described between men and women or whatever? I mean, that would need research, and I wouldn't be the one to do that research. There may be somebody possibly in some American university doing research on that right now. I mean, it might be, I mean, if you're really interested in that, it might be worth Googling it, and you might find there's a PhD thesis on it, but I wouldn't be able to comment any more on that.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Go ahead. Oh, I thought, Anthony, did you have a question? Go right ahead.
Hi, I can't see Richard. Well,
Oh.
there's Richard. I know I'm quite new to all this stuff, though. I think I've had periods of very keen seeking in my life. It's a very simple question. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? I mean, life's rough at times, but there are, as a person, there can be joys and good things, good relationships or whatever. There's also times of I don't know, well, what the Buddhists call suffering, I suppose, but
Yeah.
Is it worth it? That's the simple question.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm going through the despair phase. Is it worth it?
In a way, yeah, it's a very obvious and important question. And unfortunately, again, it's a question I cannot give the sort of answer that the mind would find satisfactory. I mean, there is either a fascination or an addiction with this, or there isn't. You know, Ramana Maharshi's famous phrase that I often quote: either your head is in the tiger's mouth or it isn't. And if your head is in the tiger's mouth, there's no resisting that. So, in other words, there's an addiction, a fascination with this arises. Who knows why? And then it's seen. You know, this is seen or it isn't seen. So in a way, the question, is it worth it, dissolves, in the sense that if whatever answer I gave to that question would be wrong. If I say, no, it's not worth it, that's wrong. If I say, yes, it is worth it, that's wrong. If I say, well, maybe it is in some cases and not in others, that's also wrong. You know, the question does point us to, I mean, and again, it's kind of inevitable that the mind will construct this kind of story and think in this kind of way. That question does kind of point us to, you know, the hope, the possibility that there is something that can be gained from this. There is some goodie, if you like, that, you know, we can get from this. And of course, it's not like that, because what we're talking about is not that. It's the disappearance of the we that hopes that they can gain something from this. I mean, a phrase that's just jumped into my head that Tony sometimes uses about I don't know whether it's the person or the mind, is the person, the mind is always a businessman or a businesswoman, obviously. Let's not be sexist in our language. The mind is always, if you like, a business person. In other words, the mind is always looking for, what advantage can I get from this? And the mind can't help doing that. I mean, in a way, that sounds like a criticism of the mind, but it isn't. It's just a description of the nature of the mind. The mind cannot help always looking for, now, what can I get from this? What advantage is to be had from this? That's the natural way for the mind to, if you like, respond to this appearance. But of course, this isn't about the mind. It's not about the mind getting anything. It's not about the mind seeing anything. And so, in a way, you know, questions of, you know, will it be better? Is there something, you know, to be got from this? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? It's very frustrating, but in a way, those questions simply dissolve.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of knowing in unconditional love sounds as if it would be worth it. Then,
except you will not know that, because if unconditional love is seen, you won't be there seeing it. It's like the presence of the person that blocks out the view of unconditional love.
Right. Okay.
And I mean, I often add this when this comes up. You know, I think, particularly if we're kind of used to the sort of, you know, the sort of the spiritual paths, the idea of unconditional love, the person can get hold of that and turn that into a sort of form of self-torture. Because if the person thinks, well, unconditional love is about me doing something, then the person can constantly torture itself, because the person is never sufficiently unconditionally loving. In fact, the person is never unconditionally loving at all, because for the person, there will always be things which are excluded from love, and therefore it's not unconditional. I mean, as I often say, the difficult word in the phrase unconditional love is not the word love. You know, we all have some kind of handle on what love means, unless we're a psychopath. And it's probable that if we're a psychopath, we will not be at this meeting. So I'm going to assume that everybody at this meeting has some handle on what the word love means. It's the word unconditional which floors us. If we turn this into something which we feel is a desirable characteristic for me, a spiritual person, to develop, it just becomes torture. Because suddenly I, the person, have to try and love all sorts of things and people I don't love. Or in other words, I, the person, have to pretend that I love all sorts of things and all sorts of people that I don't love. But this has nothing to do with me as a person. You know, unconditional love is seen when the person collapses. And so the kind of torture or torment that a lot of us may have put ourselves through on spiritual paths, a lot of that torture and torment will come from this kind of almost unavoidable misunderstanding that unconditional love has something to do with me. So I must develop that for myself. And every time I fail to do that, which I will, every time I fail to do that, then I now have a reason to beat myself up. Oh, you know, I'm not unconditional loving enough. You know, this driver cut me up on the road, and you know, for 3.5 seconds I allowed myself to be angry with them, so I wasn't loving enough. I mean, that kind of, I want to call it crap because it is. When unconditional love is seen, it has nothing to do with the character. Richard, John, Peter, Naomi, Mary, Elizabeth, it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with the character.
I think I'm maybe one step further away than that. In that, if through my spiritual practice, the person gets out of the way, it seems that love does flow more around me and in my life. But then the onus is on to do more spiritual practice to get the person out of the way to enable. So it's even more.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong. Obviously, you know, there's nothing wrong with spiritual practice. Nothing right, nothing wrong with it. It is what's happening. For some characters, spiritual practice can become a kind of unhealthy addiction, and it can become another way of beating ourselves up. It doesn't have to, but it can do. But, you know, spiritual practice can also have very beneficial results for the person. I mean, you know, I am a long-term meditator. I meditated assiduously for about 30 years. And, you know, I would say that, you know, meditation was good for me. You know, the character of Richard benefited from meditation. However, another character can get hold of meditation, and if they have a kind of, you know, a very sort of more addictive nature or whatever, it can become a kind of torture.
Yeah,
I've met people who are sort of tortured because they feel like they never meditate enough, and so they can turn meditation into a you know, a reason for continual guilt. But that doesn't have to happen. You know, it's almost like anything. You know, it can be, you know, meditation can be wonderful or torture.
think I could have a slightly addictive nature. So that's something for me to watch out for, I think. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you.
I mean, I mean, you all know. I mean, as long as you feel like you're getting something from it, and you know you're not using it to torture yourself, then yeah, it's great. You know,
Okay.
it's really great. I taught meditation for many years.
Okay.
Michael Markham's up next.
In the character Richard's opinion, is there any question that can arise that isn't part of this dream of separation, and any answer in response to that question would also have to be part of that dream, would it not?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. This is, I mean, this meeting is part of the dream of separation. Yeah, it just happens to be a meeting in which, you know, what is focused on, if you like, is the possibility of seeing through that dream.
Can a dream be seen through from within the dream?
Yeah, that's a tricky. That depends on how we're defining words, really. I mean, we could say, well, you know, for the character, there is only the dream. You know, there is only the dream. So we could say within the dream, there is the possibility of seeing through the dream. I think it's at this point that I will retreat where I usually retreat with a question like this, which is, you know, to the title of that very, I think, very good book by Leo Harting, Awakening to the Dream. So Leo Harting calls awakening, as we're talking about it in this sense, he talks about it as awakening to the dream. In other words, waking up to the fact that this is a dream. And the dream goes on, as opposed to awakening from the dream, which in the terms in which Leo Harting used that, is physical death. So what we're talking about here is the possibility that while this appearance is apparently going on, there is the possibility that it may be seen that it is an appearance. So that's awakening to the dream.
I talked to Leo for years, and never got what appeared to be an answer to this question, which I think is fundamental to the search that seekers are on. The idea that we can wake up to the dream or from the dream. When the person here sees the dream as our only and total reality, that could be called waking up to the dream, I suppose, but it's still part of the dream. The lucid dreaming at night, you can fly and you can have some control, and you think that you're real, but it's all dream. Everything that has a word, even love that you were talking about, there's really no such thing as love or unconditional love. Here that is seen, the person here sees that as love is part of longing. And when there's some release from that longing, we term that love. There's a release from the existential angst of aloneness. And it's chemical. And love is merely a chemical reaction in the brain. That sounds a bit nihilistic, but here it seems sublimely peaceful, knowing that things exist only in the naming of them, including love or anything else that we see or have.
Love is merely a chemical reaction, or whatever you said in the brain. It's an idea, it's an assumption, it can't be known.
So
it's fine stuff. Again, it's story. It simply can't be known.
Well, something would have to exist to not be incapable of being known. The idea of love is merely everybody would have a different definition, of course. And to me, the common core of our humanity is this aloneness and longing. And for me, what we call love is merely a brief moment when we don't feel alone or as much alone, or the longing has had some soothing effect.
Yeah.
But it all returns.
I think again, you know, we're hitting the limits of language here, because you know, I use this word love because there isn't a better word, but absolutely, you know, what you're describing, which is you know, kind of a manifestation of, let's call it sort of personal love, you know, individual love, you know, which we could say, you know, make all sorts of statements about, you know. And then what's seen when the person collapses, it's just, it is misleading to use the same word for it, and yet there isn't a better word. And so we don't have to, but I'm choosing to, because you know, there simply isn't a better alternative. But, you know, what you're describing to me, I mean, you're describing to me, you know, what seems to me, you know, very kind of familiar, a kind of, you know, existential view, existential feelings, existential thoughts. I kind of relate to all of that. I kind of relate to all of that. The character of Richard kind of relates to that. But what this character Richard is talking about here, in a kind of futile way, but nevertheless, you know, we do our best, you know, is something which is completely different to that. I would say, you know, something which, I mean, I would say, you know, this character had a very existential outlook on life, non-nihilistic, but very existential outlook on life. And that just kind of collapsed with the rest of it when what I'm trying very inadequately to describe here, you know, when that was seen, you know, when it's seen, it tends to kind of put an end to that sort of existential, I don't know what to call it. I don't want to say existential hopelessness, you know, but anyway, yeah, it just tends to kind of knock it on the head. And although
excuse me,
you know, if I fall in love romantically, there kind of is a connection with that and what I'm trying to explain, and yet we're talking about different universes.
can we say there is just one self, and we are all that self, and this self is falling to a dream, and now we are all getting together to wake up in this dream as one self that is dreaming of so many selves, that all of them is illusion, and now we are kind of in a dream, and then we are talking about this dream, and we want to wake up of this dream. Can we like have this type of, what do you think about it?
I would say if that description works for you, have it. But I personally wouldn't say there is just one self. I would say ultimately there is just, words fail, so we go for the word oneness, which is not the same for me as saying there's just one self. And it may not be the same for you, but for me it's because, you know, there is one self implies all sorts of things which I think takes us into the realms of thought and speculation beyond what can actually be known. But what you're describing there, I mean, I recognize it as a very popular, in a way, a very attractive story. And if that's what makes sense for you, then it makes sense for you. Yeah. But I say, you know, what this scene is about, you know, from the description that I'm trying to give, is it goes beyond, if you like, any sense of self, even it may be one self which we all in some way belong to or participate in.
So, but then there is no self, and so there is no Richard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who is talking now? Who is talking now? Who is this person?
What's your name? I can't see on the screen.
Mariam.
Maria. Hi, Maria. Yes, yeah, there is no Richard, and Richard isn't talking, and there is no Maria, and Maria was not talking and will not talk in a few seconds.
So, but all these things that you are saying now,
oneness manifesting is everything. It's oneness manifesting as this glorious appearance. It's a dream. It's like, I don't know if this, it's a kind of dream, as, you know, that's a metaphor. You know, I don't know if this will work, but maybe you can remember a dream you had last night, you know, in which there was, you know, a Maria, and, you know, this character did blah, 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 whatever it did. And, you know, then you woke up in the morning and there was a recognition that none of that actually happened. That's not a great analogy, but it's, you know, it's good enough. Again, it's about as close as we can get. What happens to the character of Maria in, you know, in the night? Maria has a dream, and then there's a waking up. What happens to the character in the dream? They die, you could say, or you could say, well, they never actually existed, and yet something.
There was someone who woke up and knew that had a dream,
Yeah.
So now, so you are talking, and so, and you know that there is no self. What is that? That who knows there is no self?
No
Like
one. No one knows
the
that
one.
themselves. Yeah. And yeah.
Mm. It's sorry.
So
It's
the
a little
difference,
bit.
you could say,
I
you could say the difference between waking up from the nighttime dream and waking up in the sense that I'm talking about, you know, there's a nighttime dream, and then Richard wakes up and knows that it was a nighttime dream. And what we're talking about, no one wakes up and then knows that this is a kind of dream. I am being careful with what I say, because obviously in some pretty obvious ways, this is not identical to a nighttime dream, but nevertheless, it's a good enough analogy. It'll serve a point. So in the morning, Richard wakes up and recognizes that the nighttime dream was a dream. And with this kind of waking up, no one wakes up and recognizes that this is a kind of dream.
Okay. Natalie has her hand up. Go ahead, Natalie.
Hi. Hi there. Hi, Richard. You know, talking about the unconditional love, when you were speaking, I don't know, this was a little bit ago, you had mentioned something, maybe I read it in one of your books, but that unconditional love includes dog shit. And that kind of just was like, yeah, okay, yes. You know, waking up from a dream, who could do it? This is the only dream, is what I like to say. I mean, this is just as it is. And it's, there was a time where there was a lot of thoughts about being able to get it right or wrong. And now that just, yeah, I could feel like, oh, I did that right or wrong, but there's no sense that it's an actual right or wrong. You know, it's more just as it is. And I really like the dog shit. The girl that asked that to you, that was perfect. That did it for me. So there you go. Thank you, dog shit, and Richard.
As you mentioned that didn't come from me. It came from a member.
I know, from the girl. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Absolutely. You see, the unconditional love, as I often say, the challenging word in that phrase is not the word love; it's the word unconditional. The mind, personal mind, absolutely cannot get unconditional love, because unconditional love includes everything that the personal mind most hates, because if it didn't include it wouldn't be unconditional. And so you know, this is one of the ways I think in which certain ideas we come across on a spiritual path can really screw us up. Not do necessarily, but can do.
Right, possibly, yeah.
Idea, I've got to be unconditionally loving, and now I can just torture myself forever, because no matter how hard I try, that is not going to happen for Richard the person.
Same here. Yeah. I just wanted to say that. It was nice seeing you.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely chat. Thanks you.
Thanks, Natalie. Nice seeing you.
Thanks, Walter. Nice seeing you.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi. Am I unmuted?
I can
you hear me?
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Well, hi, Richard and everyone.
See you as well now.
Yeah, hi. For me, I have just one question. I don't have any questions about the issue per se, because I suppose this thing has happened here. Absolutely unwanted, unwarranted. I didn't believe in it. I didn't even know it existed. And so, just like you describe, one morning it was just, I can't even pinpoint the moment when it happened. I know something seemingly happened, but well, there just wasn't anyone there, simply, anymore, just like you say. And so then when I found your books and started reading and listening to you, and it's just the things you say are just like, yeah, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. It's just a fact here as well. But I'm wondering, how usual would you say that this is, this happening, the self falling away? Because I don't know one person who even remotely understands what the hell this is all about. And I very rarely, almost never talk about it because people think you're just nuts or they just don't understand. So how usual is this, would you say?
I can't answer that question other than saying that it seems to be more usual. It seems to be in the story of time, it seems to be becoming less unusual. That's all I can really say. I mean, why that is? Oh, why is that? Oh, well, now we're invited to invent another story. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, because it's, I mean, it's not lonely because you can't be lonely. There is no you to be lonely. But in a way, it still is kind of lonely because no one understands this, or almost no one understands this. So, and you can't explain it either.
If you're lucky enough to, be part of a community where this is talked about, it is at least understood and perhaps seen or whatever. I mean, that can be a great blessing. I mean, otherwise it can seem very, very lonely. And I do one-to-one sessions, and sometimes, the reason somebody wants a one-to-one session with me is precisely because, they feel very alienated from, and often from their families, from their, it's like from the ones who should be closest to them. That there's just, a gulf can open up.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be a kind of catastrophe on that level. It certainly doesn't have to be, but it can be, because, for example, I mean, the example I give is that sometimes, for example, a relationship, the glue that holds a relationship together may be, for example, a shared love of a spiritual path. And so we follow the same guru. Perhaps we, have a little shrine for that guru in our home. Perhaps we have meetings where we show videos of our beloved guru to a select group of friends and so forth. And this is part of, maybe a very important part of the glue that holds our relationship together. And then one of us, there's this seeing. And suddenly all of that may be just seen as, it's difficult to take it seriously anymore. Now, it's quite possible that will be okay, and, the relationship will not be challenged by that, but it's equally possible that, if that's what was holding the relationship together, that, that shared love of this spiritual path, then the relationship may fall apart. I mean, that's just one example of how it could happen. So this certainly doesn't have to damage relationships. This kind of, this seeing can very much have the opposite effect, or no effect at all. But there's no doubt that sometimes this can blow everything in our life apart, including, our closest relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've been a kind of spiritual seeker as well. I've never been into non-duality, but I have been very much into like near-death experiences. I've had one myself, and more of experiences, past life experiences. I've had those. But this, like you say, it cuts through absolutely everything. None of that means anything anymore. It's like, well, I can still remember the experiences, but they don't mean anything. So, yeah.
No, I absolutely, I relate to that. I mean, in my seeking years, I did quite a lot of, past life regression.
Yeah.
A lot of experiences like that. Yeah, absolutely. And for a while they seemed important, and then they don't seem important anymore.
Yeah. So with this, in a way, you kind of lose, in a sense, you lose all kinds of possibilities to relate through the usual stuff to other people. You can't relate through experiences. You can't relate through a philosophy, through a kind of shared view of reality or whatever, because there is no you to relate anymore. So, but on the other hand, it's where I don't feel alienated because there is no one to be alienated. So I feel fine, but still it's kind of, kind of boring that there is no one around that you can talk to about this.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be talking to you.
Good. Yeah, yeah. There is no doubt. This is what we're talking about here is a loss.
Yeah.
Again, what we're talking about is a loss, but we're talking about the loss of something where there may be a profound relief at having lost it. And the mind might say, "Oh, well, that's a kind of gain, then, isn't it?" Well, who knows? But they can, this is a loss, and it can produce this kind of sense of. It's not like it. I mean, I use the word alienation. It's more like a loss of connection that used to be there. So I still have friends from my spiritual seeking days, but there is a loss in a way, in the sense of a kind of connection that we had and don't have anymore. Things we could talk about that we can't talk about anymore. But there's still other connections there, so that's okay.
Cups of tea and stuff like that.
Yeah. And in a way, it is a way, ultimately, I would say, a loss of something which, we're better off without.
Yeah, well, if this seems to be
it's a bit like growing up. It's a bit like, I mean, a diet of ice cream, and strawberry milkshakes and donuts and so forth is absolutely wonderful. It's lovely, but maybe there is, maybe there is an advantage to giving that up. I don't know if that analogy worked. It was an analogy. I didn't mean, but, hopefully it kind of slightly worked. I mean, obviously we don't give it up, but if a diet of milkshakes and donuts and ice cream gives us up, well, that can also be a blessing.
Yeah, I think I understand.
You can't sit around and talk about milkshakes to your milkshake friends anymore, but maybe you can find something else to talk to them about.
Yeah, exactly. And if it is becoming more usual, like you say, then maybe someone will pop up eventually who gets this in my vicinity. So yeah. Thank you. Maybe something else will come up. I'd like to
there's a local meeting fairly near me that happens once a month, which I go to. There's very good coffee and biscuits there, and it's a meeting about non-duality. Really lovely people, the people that go there. Almost nothing that is said there relates to non-duality as I understand it, or as I see it. But nevertheless, it's a lovely meeting to go to.
Yeah, I really get that. Yeah, thank you.
All right, next question. Oh, we have some stuff in the chat here. Let's see. Sorry. Can't tell. It's a whole conversation going on. Oh, how did you reach this realization?
Okay, yeah, that's really almost the easiest of all questions to answer, because I didn't reach it. And in a sense, that's not the whole point, but that's kind of quite an important point in what we're talking about here. I didn't reach it. Nobody reaches this. This realization, if we call it. I'm not sure that I use that word or whether I use it very often, but let's go with that. This realization, if we call it that, is something that happens when I am not there. And by which I don't mean when I have done something to disappear myself, because I cannot do that. So what's being talked about here is simply the possibility that the sense of I, the sense of personhood, can collapse, And if it collapses, then this may be seen. That is really a very key question. It's a very obvious question as well. Yeah, and it can also, the answer to that can be supremely frustrating, because of course the person, the I, wants to know, what can I do? What are the steps on the path that I can take? Yeah.
So, sorry, I just don't get something. So, no, you know, like, I don't have a problem that, for example, there is no Richard, there is no Mariam, there is no one. I don't have any problem with that. But when I am waking up one day in the morning and I am not there, and then I realize there is no Mariam. But what is this realization? This, who knows that there is no Mariam?
No
There
one.
is no Richard.
No one.
No, this is not.
No one knows.
This
No.
cannot be the answer. There should be like this realization that there is no one, that I am not there.
Yeah.
So, but there is something that knows that Mariam was an illusion. There is something.
There is nothing. There is nothing.
Okay.
Nothing recognizes. You have to, I mean, in a way, you have to hear this sentence in both ways. It's an ambiguous sentence, and in a way, I mean it in both ways. Nothing realizes that Mariam is not there. Nothing.
But then
Is that there is a realization by no one that Mariam is not there. The mind cannot get this, you see. So I mean, two things the mind is quite likely not to be able to do. One is the mind may not be able to stop puzzling about this. For some minds, the mind may not be able to stop puzzling about this, and the mind cannot puzzle it out, which is very frustrating, because the mind has to go on trying to do what it must fail to do. Very frustrating, very frustrating. I mean, this mind here was very frustrated by this for a long time, and angry about it as well. If I haven't, I think I might have said that earlier in the meeting, but yeah, this mind was very frustrated and very angry about this for a long time, but nevertheless fascinated by it and addicted to it. Yeah.
Somebody asked, how do we quiet the mind?
Oh, there are lots of ways of quieting the mind. You know, I don't think I'm here really to give much advice about that. This has nothing to do with quieting the mind. Yeah, there are meditations and all sorts of things. Mindfulness practice, you know, all kinds of techniques, some of which are quite bad for us, some of which are quite good for us, and some of which can be good for us or bad for us, depending on how we actually practice them. You know, but that's not what this is about. This isn't about quietening the mind. Quietening something which does not exist will not bring about the recognition that it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as a mind, so we cannot quieten it. Nevertheless, I recognize that trying to quieten the non-existent mind is quite likely to happen, particularly if we're attracted to non-duality, spirituality, etc. But trying to quieten something which does not exist will not result in the disappearance of the thing that did not exist in the first place. Now, having said that, various techniques for quietening the mind may be quite helpful or beneficial to the character. You know, there's certainly nothing here criticizing any of those techniques, and if we find ourselves attracted to them and we do them, absolutely fine. You know, mindfulness works for some people, doesn't work for other people. When I say it works for some people, I mean that it, you know, it seems to make the life of the character, let's say, easier in some ways, and for other people it doesn't. Well, that's fine. You know, there's no criticism here of any of those techniques. but it's not
But
what.
if you were not quieting your mind, would you
Say again?
reach this state? If you were not quieting your mind, do you think so? You were saying that you were in the path of meditation and spirituality. Do you think if you were not in this path, then you had this realization that,
Yeah.
like,
This
this?
in terms of biography, it's impossible to answer that question in a way. You know, if anything was different, then what? Well, who knows? But if I sort of take that element out and just sort of take it as a, you know, as a question in general, yeah, absolutely, these things do not compute. In other words, there can be quietening of the mind and mindfulness and Zen meditation and mantra meditation, and this may be seen or it may not be seen, and there can be none of that, and this may be seen and it may not be seen. So the mind is going to look for cause and effect, causal links and so forth, and the mind will do that, and it's absolutely fine. But what I'm saying here is that's irrelevant. What happens is, after all, what happens is what happens. So there will be meditation or there won't be meditation. And there will be awakening in the sense that we're seeing this, or while the life breath is still going on, not that. You know, and the mind is going cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. Well, that's just the mind. When this is seen, that tends to collapse.
Has seeing done anything to your body that you're aware of, Richard?
No, I don't think so. Tai Chi has. 20, nearly 20 years of Tai Chi has done something to my body, but no. No, I mean, I'm just thinking, have I spoken to people where they've said, I can't, I know, I can't go any further. All I could say is, no, I don't think so, no. I mean, if you mean that in the obvious sense, you know, the physical body, no, I don't think so, no. It's an interesting question, though. I don't think anyone's asked that before.
I mean, I'm just thinking of, who was it? Avasa just didn't eat for 3 or 4 weeks after he'd realized it exists, you know. I just.
Oh, in terms of, yeah, well, no, yeah, in terms of temporary effect, I mean, there does tend to be, I mean, here there was, and for, I think quite a lot of individuals, there does tend to be an initial period of time during which there is quite a lot of inactivity. So that happened here, not in an extreme way, but sometimes you come across characters where it's really extreme, and it's like, you know, for a year or two after seeing, you know, that almost nothing was done. So in that sense, yeah, but in terms of like changes to the body physically, I don't think so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we have more questions in the chat here. Okay, so there's just a present experience of a memory there to be used by someone.
Well, I'd agree with the first part of that, but not the second. Yeah, that insofar as a memory might arise, then yeah, that is a thought, is a present. There's only ever, you know, present experience, if you like. So yes, if a memory arises, that is a present experience of something that appeared to happen in the apparent history of this character called Richard. Right, now I have a very poor memory, so I've now already forgotten the second half of.
I think I misread it, actually.
I
It says,
didn't agree with it. Whatever
it says, there's, okay, so there's just is a present experience of a memory
Yes.
that there used to be someone. So there's just a memory that there was someone.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I think I slightly misinterpreted. Yeah, the memory, because of course a memory is always of an apparent past. So yeah, you could say that. Yeah. I withdraw my quarrel with the second half of that sentence. Yeah, that's, yeah, I'd agree. Yeah.
Okay, then we got, is that the first copy of I Am That on the shelf behind you?
Probably. Yeah, I can't turn around that far, but yeah, probably. Well, but first, I don't think it's the original. Yeah, it's a well-thumbed copy of I Am That, which I think is in some ways an interesting book. Yeah.
I asked that because I wore out 2 copies.
Friend who is sadly no longer with us, and for years he walked around. He was a bit of a hippie, and he walked around with a kind of fisherman's knapsack with a copy of I Am That in it everywhere he went, and any kind of empty moments, which for him there were a lot, in a coffee bar or sitting on a bench, he would take it out and be thumbing through it. Yeah.
So there's a question that says, so realization, does it just happens or it doesn't?
Yeah, you could say that. There's no such thing as realization, and yet it just happens or it doesn't. It's terrible. Another paradox to chew on.
Here in the Zoom, got a question?
So you are not bored then with this view? Like there is nothing, there is no one, there is just empty. It's not boring, like it's not, then it's not interesting at all.
No, again, I've written about this. It's quite dangerous to give any kind. Well, certainly you can't give rules, and guidelines even are quite dangerous. But as a matter of fact, I would say that it is most unlikely for boredom to continue when this is seen. I mean, you're trying to avoid guidelines or anything like that, and just as a matter of description, having talked to and had a lot of written communications with people. I mean, I've had many, many emails over the years from different people, and I would say this is the common experience, that when this is seen, no more boredom. Boredom ends. I'm not sure why. I could speculate slightly. It seems to me that, boredom is not, boredom isn't a real feeling. It's what sometimes is called a pseudo feeling. It's not a real natural feeling. It seems to me that boredom is what arises when we're cut off from real feelings for all sorts of reasons I'm not going to go into. This isn't meant to be an evening about psychological matters. But for whatever reason, just as a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever talked to anybody where this has been seen who said that they continue to experience boredom.
So imagine like we have a world that everybody is no one. And then where goes the fascination of the whole world, of discovering, of experiencing new things, then all of these disappears then.
No, probably. And again, there's no rules. I can't say this absolutely. So I'm just, giving this as an intuition. I would say, intuitive, I would say then everything will be just much more interesting and much more fascinating, because what happens with this is that the neurotic self is very, very good at making reality, existence, dull and grey and boring, because the neurotic self is too caught up with its own kind of these stories in the head to actually notice the fascination of the ordinary in the everyday. So when this is seen, it's most likely that very simple things will become much more fascinating rather than less, and there'll just be much more delight and fascination with the world as it is.
Then for whom? There is no one.
No one. For the no
so
one.
I can get, for example, if I am into my mind. So okay, I accept that human mind. If we stay just in the surface and then just exploring in our mind, okay, we don't reach anywhere. If we somehow, I don't know, with different techniques or just stopping thoughts or whatever, like expand our mind or go beyond ourselves, you know, and then have this feeling of the connection to everything and discovering to the like this analogy that I said before, like having this type of self that wants to discover itself, you know, like then you can see a kind of fascination in it. But if everybody thinks there is no one and not nothing, then to whom appears this fascination?
This is not about expanding the mind. It's about the recognition there is no such thing as a mind. You know, and this isn't fascinating to anyone. In fact, when there's someone there, you know, apparently observing this, the fascination tends to be dumbed down. Everything becomes more grey. When there's no one here observing this, then what is being observed by no one becomes much more fascinating. And I've often quoted this story again that Tony told many, many years ago, that somebody, you know, this happened, or the thing that doesn't happen didn't happen, if you like. And somebody phoned Tony up and said, it's amazing, I've been sitting in the garden for half an hour just watching an ant crawling over a twig. And that's a kind of very good, it's not a metaphor, it's a, you know, it's just a literal piece of description, but it stands very well, if you like, as a metaphor for what's quite likely to happen when this is seen, which is that the really simple things are likely to be seen, or it's possible that they'll be seen in their truly fascinating existence, when the mind story that grinds remorselessly on, blah, 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 neurosis, philosophy, meaning of life, blah, 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 when that quietens down or dies, then it's likely that existence itself is likely to be seen as much more fascinating. So you don't need to worry about, oh my God, isn't this going to be boring if everybody sees it? No, boredom dies, as I've already said. I mean, that's not an absolute rule. There are no absolute rules, but I will be very surprised. You know, the first time I speak to somebody where this has been seen and they say, oh my God, and I'm so bored, I will be very, very surprised. You don't need to worry about that.
But the problem is this state of mind just happens to like few number of individuals, like they can reach to this state, you know.
This isn't
Then
a state of mind, and it's not something anyone can reach. It's not a state of mind. If it was a state of mind, we could probably think ourselves into it.
so what can I do that tomorrow morning when I wake up, that I am not there?
There is no
What
you.
can I do for that?
There is no you. So it's not a question of there's nothing you can do, or you can do this, or you can do that. There is no you. There is no one who does. I'd love to be able to give you a guideline. I would really love to be able to. What a guideline as to what you can do. I can't do that because there is no one. This is about the possibility that the seeing that there is no one may arise.
But I think this is something that happens in your brain or someone else's brain, that something happened, that this self, this no self appeared, so that in others it didn't. Like something, because what we get from what we are experiencing, like we are talking, this is something that happened in your brain, you know, and can happen to someone else's brain also.
Yeah.
I don't know, like people, they have the similar experience with psychedelic, because this some chemical in their brain like makes this type of experience, that the self is just gone.
Well, maybe. I mean, I've had psychedelic experiences and they're nothing like what I'm talking about here. But this thing about, you know, as you said, you know, this is an experience which happens in the brain. Well, maybe that is pure speculation. That's pure speculation. I can't really comment on that. But other than to say, what I started off by saying at the beginning of this talk. You know, this isn't an experience. It sounds like it's an experience because it has to, because we're talking about it. That's what communication in words about this does, which is why communication is always misleading to some extent. You know, but this is not an experience in the brain because it isn't an experience. It's frustrating, I know. Believe me, I do know.
Well, we're just about out of time. So any last questions before we end the meeting?
Can I say something regarding what Mary is asking?
Go right ahead.
And please, Richard, correct me if I am wrong. What you, Mary, are calling me that should disappear is just a thought. It's a makeup, it's a construction. So it, in a way, it's the other way around. The natural state is that there is no Mary anyway. When you wake up in the morning, the brain begins to work and construct back the Mary. There is no Mary.
So I
when
don't
you
have
ask,
problem with there is no Mary. I am just saying if there is no Mary or there is no one, but there is something that realizes that there is no one. You know, I
yes, but
can get that one. Okay, I am not there, or Richard is not there, and but when so like Richard says about this experience in London, that suddenly Richard was gone. But who knew that Richard is gone?
No one.
But Mary, look, if
No
you
one.
are everything, if you are everything, okay? Everything is knowing everything. It's not, there is nothing separate knowing something else.
So, but then there
It
is
is only,
everything. We cannot say no, there is, so everything is, nothing is different from everything. If I say, okay, then I become everything, then I understand that. But if I say, no, I am nothing, then I don't get that.
yes, but you are everything by being nothing. Because you see, there is nothing separate from everything. There is nothing else but everything. And this everything is what is acknowledging the brain working and functioning like Mary. But there is no real Mary. It's just a fabrication that goes on. If it stops, nothing disappears really, and nothing will appear really. It is already what is happening. Sorry, this is sort of what I wanted to say.
No, it's very well put. It's very well put indeed, yeah.
And sorry for my so many questions. I just wanted, I read about this non-duality and I really came to this meeting to understand
No,
what's
this
going
is
on. Yeah.
your questions are really beautiful, and
Yeah.
I think that a mature person should ask these questions. These are the really important questions. The other questions are completely irrelevant, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have
okay.
more questions, then you know, if there's another meeting next month, come along to that and ask them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you have any plugs for meetings or YouTube or anything, Richard?
Well, if anyone is in the sort of London area, probably quite possibly no one on this meeting is, but if there will be an in-person London meeting, it's the last Saturday this month, the last Saturday, whatever the date is. And if you are in London and you're interested in that, you can find the details of that on my website or meetup page, or I also have an email sort of newsletter mail out for meetings, so you can join that if you want to. I think that's the only upcoming thing at the moment.
All right. And I have our very own Michael Markham on June 17th. It's a Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Then I have one more non-duality meeting after that, and then I'm going to take a break for a little while. Might interview some stand-up comedians and change it up, change the topic. But I might mix in, I don't know. I'm just gonna interview various people, so we'll see. But it might not all be non-duality. So just heads up. But I got 2 more non-duality meetings come up before I make that switch. So just FYI. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Richard.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
See you next time with Michael Markham. All right.